Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
This is the Daily History Chronicle, where we explore the moments that shaped our world and discover why they still matter today. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. On February 24th, 1868, the United States House of Representatives did something that had never been done before in American history. They impeached a sitting president. The vote was 126 to 47. Straight party lines, every Republican for, every Democrat against. And here's what pulls me into this moment. Andrew Johnson was being impeached for firing his Secretary of War. That's it. At least that's what the official charge said. But to understand what really happened that day, you have to hold several truths at once. Johnson was defying a law that Congress had specifically passed to trap him. That law was probably unconstitutional. Johnson might have been right about the law, but catastrophically wrong about nearly everything else. And the men impeaching him were fighting for the rights of formerly enslaved people while also conducting what amounted to a political coup. All of those things are true. Picture this. It's late afternoon in the House chamber. February 24th. The debate has raged for 3 days. In the gallery, a 75-year-old man sits watching, so frail he can barely stand. His name is Thaddeus Stevens, the architect of this impeachment. A man kept alive, some say, by sheer hatred of Andrew Johnson. When Stevens finally rises to speak, the chamber falls silent. His voice is weak. Often the clerk has to read his words for him because he lacks the strength to finish. But when he speaks, everyone listens. This is not to be the temporary triumph of a political party, Stevens tells them, but is to endure in its consequence until this whole continent shall be filled with a free and untrammeled people, or shall be a nest of shrinking, cowardly slaves. Think about that language. Shrinking, cowardly slaves. These are not the words of political compromise. Let me build the clock for you. 3 years earlier, John Wilkes Booth murdered Abraham Lincoln, and Andrew Johnson, a Tennessee Democrat chosen for the Unity ticket, became president. Johnson was a Union man, yes, but he was also a man who reportedly declared, "This is a country for white men, and as long as I am president, it shall be a government for white men." Lincoln had planned a lenient Reconstruction. Johnson took that leniency and turned it into something else entirely. Blanket pardons for Confederate leaders, opposition to black voting rights, vetoes of every bill designed to protect the freedmen. Congress would pass laws. Johnson would veto them. Congress would override the vetoes. Johnson would simply refuse to enforce what had become law. By early 1867, Republicans in Congress, particularly the radical Republicans led by Stevens, realized they had a problem. The War Department, under Secretary Edwin Stanton, was responsible for administering Reconstruction policy in the South. Stanton sided with Congress. Johnson wanted him gone. If Johnson could remove Stanton and install someone loyal, he could effectively gut Reconstruction from the inside. So Congress did something extraordinary. They passed the Tenure of Office Act in March 1867 over Johnson's veto. The law said a president couldn't fire cabinet members without Senate approval. It was a direct challenge to executive power. Was it constitutional? Probably not. Even some of Johnson's opponents admitted it. The Supreme Court would later strike down similar laws. Johnson's own cabinet unanimously agreed the act was unconstitutional. But here's the thing. Johnson didn't just ignore the law, he decided to test it repeatedly. In August 1867, while the Senate was in recess, Johnson suspended Stanton and appointed Ulysses S. Grant as interim Secretary of War. When the Senate reconvened in January 1868, they refused to approve Stanton's removal. Grant, not wanting to damage his presidential ambitions, promptly resigned and gave the office back to Stanton. Johnson was furious. He opened a public feud with Grant, politically suicidal in a nation that revered the general. Then, on February 21st, 1868, Johnson made his move. He formally dismissed Stanton and appointed Lorenzo Thomas, a longtime Stanton enemy, as the new Secretary of War. Stanton's response? He barricaded himself in his office, literally. He locked the doors and refused to leave, sleeping on a couch in the War Department while Thomas tried to claim the post. At one point, Stanton had Thomas arrested for trying to seize his office. It was a farce, a constitutional crisis playing out as theater. Within hours, the House received word of Johnson's action. Representative John Cavody of Pennsylvania introduced a one-sentence resolution that Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, be impeached of high crimes and misdemeanors. Note what's missing from that resolution: no specific charges, no articles of impeachment, just the decision to impeach, with the details to come later. It seems backward to us now, but that was standard procedure in the 19th century. The debate that followed was extraordinary. Moderate Republicans who had opposed impeachment just 2 months earlier now voted for it. Why? Because Johnson had finally given them a clear violation of federal law, even if that law was constitutionally questionable. Representative William Kelly of Pennsylvania didn't care about legal niceties. He stood on the House floor and declared, "Sir, the bloody and untilled fields of the 10 unreconstructed states, the unsheeted ghosts of the 2,000 murdered Negroes in Texas, cry, if the dead ever evoke vengeance, for the punishment of Andrew Johnson." There it is, the real charge, not the Tenure of Office Act, not the firing of Stanton. The charge was Johnson's entire approach to Reconstruction, his pardons, his vetoes, his refusal to protect black lives in the South. Thaddeus Stevens believed this too. When the committee began drafting articles of impeachment, Stevens fought to make them broader than just the Stanton firing. He wanted Johnson charged with declaring Congress itself unconstitutional, with making inflammatory speeches against Congress, with systematically obstructing Reconstruction. Stevens succeeded in getting some of these charges included. Article 10 accused Johnson of making intemperate, inflammatory, and scandalous harangues against Congress. Article 11, Stevens's creation, charged Johnson with denying that Congress had the constitutional authority to even propose amendments. But the core remained the Tenure of Office Act. 9 of the 11 articles centered on Stanton's removal. When the vote came on February 24th, it was never in doubt. The result? 126 to 47. Every Republican voted yes. Every Democrat voted no. Not a single member crossed party lines. Speaker Schuyler Colfax appointed Stevens and John Bingham to inform the Senate of the impeachment. The next day, Stevens, so weak he needed a cane just to stand, walked into the Senate chamber and delivered the message. By order of the House of Representatives, we appear at the bar of the Senate, and in the name of the House of Representatives and of all the people of the United States, we do impeach Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, of high crimes and misdemeanors in office. The trial would begin on March 5th. It would last 11 weeks, and on May 16th, Johnson would survive by a single vote. We're still living with the consequences of this moment. The Johnson impeachment established precedents that echo through every impeachment since. It asked a question we're still debating. Can a president be impeached for political disputes, or does it require an actual crime? 7 Republican senators voted to acquit Johnson. Their reasoning matters. Some thought the Tenure of Office Act didn't actually apply to Stanton, since Lincoln, not Johnson, had appointed him. Others believed it was wrong to impeach a president for interpreting an ambiguous law differently than Congress did. And some worried about the precedent, that if impeachment became a tool for political disputes, the presidency itself would be fatally weakened. They were right to worry. But here's what troubles me. Their principled stand about constitutional process allowed a president who actively obstructed civil rights to complete his term. Johnson spent his remaining months continuing to veto Reconstruction bills, which Congress continued to override. Violence against Black Americans in the South continued. The unsheeted ghosts Kelly spoke of kept multiplying. Was the impeachment politically motivated? Absolutely. Was Johnson also genuinely dangerous to the project of creating a multiracial democracy? Also, yes, the acquittal created an important precedent that impeachment requires more than policy disagreements, that removing a president from office should not become routine political warfare. But it also meant that a president could systematically obstruct laws, refuse to protect citizens' rights, and survive in office as long as he stayed technically within legal bounds. Both things are true. Thaddeus Stevens died 4 months after the trial ended. He was buried in a cemetery that accepted people of all races, one of the few in America that did. His epitaph, which he wrote himself, reads, "I repose in this quiet and secluded spot, not from any natural preference for solitude, but finding other cemeteries limited by charter rules as to race. I have chosen this that I might illustrate in my death the principles which I advocated through a long life, equality of man before his Creator." Stevens was a radical. He was also a man who believed that the law should mean something, that constitutional principles should protect everyone, that America's promise should extend beyond white men. The fact that his impeachment effort was political doesn't mean he was wrong about Johnson. The fact that Johnson's acquittal preserved important constitutional checks doesn't mean he deserved to remain president. Here's what I keep coming back to. The Tenure of Office Act was probably unconstitutional, but Congress passed it because the alternative was allowing a president to dismantle civil rights from within. Johnson was probably within his rights to test the law, but doing so was an act of extraordinary recklessness during a moment when Black Americans were being murdered in the South with impunity. The impeachment was a political power play, but it was also a desperate attempt to stop a president who was actively undermining the results of a war that had cost 600,000 lives. The trial itself established crucial precedents about impeachment requiring actual wrongdoing, not just political disagreement. That's important. It protected the presidency from becoming subject to parliamentary-style votes of no confidence. But it also established that a president could effectively nullify laws through obstruction and survive as long as he avoided clear criminal violations. We live with both of those precedents. Every impeachment debate since, and there have been several, invokes Andrew Johnson. Is this policy disagreement or genuine abuse of power? Is this defending civil rights or political warfare? Where's the line between presidential prerogative and presidential obstruction? The philosopher Reinhold Niebuhr wrote, "Man's capacity for justice makes democracy possible, but man's inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary." The Johnson impeachment shows both sides of that equation. The system worked, barely. Constitutional guardrails held by one vote, but thousands died while politicians debated procedure. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, ask yourself this. When constitutional principle conflicts with urgent, moral necessity, which takes precedence? When the law is being used to obstruct justice, is it more important to follow legal process or to stop the injustice? And when political opponents genuinely believe the other side threatens democracy itself, how do we prevent impeachment from becoming routine political warfare? Because that's what February 24th, 1868 teaches us, not just about the limits of impeachment, but about the impossible choices democracies face when constitutional process and moral urgency collide. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, then please tell a friend. I hope you will join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.